When you hear that someone has autism, normally you think about autism in children. Well, that's exactly what I'm going to talk about in today's episode of My Extra Ability. Hi, everybody, it's Brendan Rossi here again with my third episode of My Extra Ability. This week we will be diving into my early years, which was when I was diagnosed with autism, and how I saw the world differently back then as compared to how neurotypical people see it today. But before we get started, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Also, leave a comment as well. If you can't comment, again, my social media is in the description down below. I'm more than willing to talk to you about my form of autism and any questions that you have regarding autism and regarding this series. So 2 weeks ago, whenever I began this series, I mentioned briefly that I didn't start talking until I was 4 years old, or at least about to turn 4 years old. That was the sign in which I wasn't a typical person and that I did have a diagnosis of something. So that was when I was taken as a young boy to get tested, and the results came back that I was on the autism spectrum. This will come into play later on in the video. But as I went through my youth, I started at several different preschools, several different daycares, and I remember my preschool years, but not so much my daycare years. The daycare years mainly come from the stories that my mom would explain to me, and how one of the symptoms is not participating in play with the other children. That's kind of where I was whenever I was in daycare, supposedly. That, again, that comes from stories of my mom. I can't tell from firsthand experience because I simply can't remember that far. I do remember going to preschool at several different schools. The one I remember most was in a town called Coriopolis, Pennsylvania. Forget the name of the school, but I remember getting dropped off there for the first time, and I was a hot mess. I remember my mom dropping me off and freaking out, like crying, throwing things, throwing a hissy fit. It was not a pleasant sight. And I think some of that has to do with, again, the form of autism and that things didn't go exactly my way, so I had a meltdown. Again, the meltdowns will play a big role in the next couple of weeks. But preschool and daycare came and went. Then I went to kindergarten and first grade. No problems there, or at least there weren't any particular episodes that I can remember. I do know that there were some times in which I was acting strange compared to the other kids. One of the main themes that stuck with me throughout my life is behavioral disturbances, and this time it was more of me just acting foolish and acting childish, which, yeah, I'm a child, I'm in kindergarten, so of course you're going to have those moments, but I would have them more frequently than the other kids would. I don't know, just I got my mind off of some things, and once my mind got focused on one thing, which again is another symptom of autism, then I would be a distraction to the other kids and the learning experience, and the teacher would have to pull me aside and try to get me to stop some way, somehow. Moving to first grade, I remember the biggest thing was I had a lisp. I used to talk like this, and I thought it was all fun and games, and I had to take speech class, and then all of a sudden I decided to stop. Why? Just because. But throughout elementary school, I do remember having to go to the guidance counselor quite a bit, whether things would get too hectic for me and I would have a case of sensory overload and I would need a break from the other children, so I just needed to refocus and get my mind off of whatever was bugging me. When I got to second grade, I noticed there was a lot more cases of me freaking out and getting angry at the slightest things. I think it was around that time that my parents decided that I was going to go to Wesley Wonder Kids. For those that don't know what Wesley Wonder Kids is, it's a social skills group designed for children aged 5 to 20, and all of them have autism. So it's a chance for children that are on the spectrum to interact with other children on the spectrum and kind of learn the ways to manage having autism together. I didn't know that at the time. I just saw it as, a place to go and meet new people and get away from the normal life. I remember having a lot of fun there. I do remember having a girlfriend for a couple of months while I was there, or at least my girlfriend from Wesley Wonder Kids. So if you're watching this video, what's up? But that goes to show that it was a good time for me. It was a good learning experience. By the time I got through Wonder Kids, second grade went by pretty quickly. Third and fourth grades, not that many problems. Overall, a pretty positive experience for me. Again, this is right before I knew that I was on the autism spectrum, so things just kind of went over my head. I didn't think twice about how the other kids acted compared to how I acted. I figured it was normal that everyone had to have their alone time, everyone had to get away from the other kids. And then the fifth grade hit, and the problems that I had in second grade, they started to pop up more frequently. Again, some of those common themes that I've had with autism, they started to resurrect themselves. I would have behavioral disturbances, which would vary. Again, meltdowns in class. I remember one time I was in gym class. I scored a goal for, I think it was soccer or hockey or something like that. And whenever all the other kids scored a goal, everyone cheered. And then I scored a goal, it was silent. Normally that's not a big deal, especially whenever you get to high school. It's just like, whatever, you're coming and going. But back then, I had the mindset of, these kids hate me. They must not want me around. They want me dead or something. It's an extreme, and the old adage goes, making a mountain out of a molehill. But that's just how I saw the world, and that's how I continue to see the world at times. Another symptom I started to develop in middle school and would resurface a couple more times in middle school was self-abuse. In middle school, and I'll get to this next week, it was because of me being depressed and me being bullied. In elementary school, I just did it just because. I was watching WWE at the time, and back in 2005, 2006, 2007, those years were pretty violent in WWE. And I remember not thinking anything of it. I remember there were a few times where I was in the swimming locker room. Once we get done swimming, I would wrap the towel around my neck. There was no particular reason for it. I just did it just because. This would come back to bite me in middle school, but again, this will come up next week. Be sure to stay tuned for that. Another thing that popped up was unusual reactions in social situations. I very briefly mentioned this in the first episode 2 weeks ago. I would have kids over or friends over. I would have a birthday party, and at my own party, at my own house, I would just leave. I would go up to my room, play some video games, and just leave my guests hanging. And I would leave my guests to wander around my house. My parents would even go up to them and ask where I am, and those kids would say, "Oh, Brandon's in his room." But again, that was because I needed a break from all of those people. Even if it's just a one-on-one thing, sometimes I would need a break from the person. And I'm sure we can all relate to that going through the last month or so, thanks COVID-19. But what we're experiencing now, getting away from all of the people that we're surrounded by 24/7 at home, that's been me for the better part of a dozen years now. Now, I remember one time I was at my friend's house, 2 stepbrothers that were in my grade. We were playing Madden, and I kicked the other 2 off at their house. And I would have the CPU play itself just to see what would happen if the New England Patriots would face the Tennessee Titans. Like, stupid stuff like that. And all the kids would look at me and go, "The hell is wrong with you?" A little bit into my 5th grade year was when I found out that I was autistic. Again, mentioned in the first video. But in case you missed it, my mom explained it to me like this. Say that you're going to Walmart. You will always turn right to go to Walmart, but your friend will always turn left to go to Walmart. It doesn't matter how you get there, but you end up at the same destination. What she's saying is it's a different way of thinking. I may take an alternate route compared to the typical people, but I still get to that same destination. And when that happened, everything made sense, but at the same time, I felt different. I felt as if, why did it have to be me? Why can't I be like the other kids? It's kind of like now where we're facing a fear of uncertainty with what's going to happen in the world. But back then, I was facing a fear of uncertainty of how the other kids thought of me. And I know it's foolish to judge your happiness based off of other people's feelings towards you, but I couldn't help but think that throughout the rest of my 5th grade year. I was able to get my mind off of things by focusing strictly on other things. The big thing was WWE. Rewind back to 2005, and what hooked me in was this wristband. This wristband was worn by John Cena. I was sitting in the front row of a Monday Night Raw in Pittsburgh. Dave Bautista and John Cena came up to me, and John Cena slipped off this wristband and gave it to me. Obviously, that's going to stick with me for the rest of my life. And regardless with what's going on with WWE now, especially with the layoffs that they just had a couple of days ago, it gave me something to focus on and gave me something that I was passionate about. I also got my mind off things by playing video games, particularly sports video games, like Madden, MLB. Whenever I was by myself, I would have the CPU against the CPU, and I would announce the game to myself. Ooh, little did I know that would come back to me. But again, those were coping mechanisms that I had to get past my form of autism. By the time the second half of the year rolled around in 5th grade, it was pretty good. Elementary school ended pretty well, and I thought that middle school would be a challenge, but it would at least be a fun time. Boy, was I wrong. So thanks for joining me on this week's episode of My Extra Ability. Next week, we'll get really interesting with middle school. Middle school is where I had the most problems with my autism, and you're going to see that next week. Again, thanks for watching. Leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment, and be sure to add me on my social media and message me on there as well if you have any questions about autism and about My Extra Ability. Thanks for watching.